I decided to go back to Chile, which in 1978. End of 78, I have finished my PhD. I had been at Brookings Institution in Washington. I had written my PhD thesis. And I was offered a lot of very nice jobs to stay in the US, and I said, no, I have to go back. I can legally enter the country. I should take advantage of that. My wife said, well, one condition, you're not going to get involved in the underground again and in the politics, and we're going to live a normal life. And I said, sure. And I lied. And the first thing that happened, I had gone back only 3 months and I fall in jail. And I had an experience of direct repression, a couple of broken fingers, and all kinds of things that, if you're interested, you can read in the book. But the point is, at that time, the situation seemed hopeless because Pinochet's economic model was beginning to work in the sense of eliminating hyperinflation. And they began talking about maybe there was an economic miracle in Chile. We're talking about 79, 80. Until Paul Volcker saves us. And Paul Volcker in 1981, as the US was experiencing inflation during the Reagan administration, they decided to control the money supply and increase interest rates. And by increasing interest rates, the money flows at that time dry up. And the Chilean orthodox model of Chicago begins crumbling down because, if it sounds familiar, there was no regulations in the banking system in Chile. It was totally contrary to the idea, no regulation whatsoever. So companies were lending to paper companies that were related to them, and when there was no money coming from the outside anymore, because it was the price of money was increasing, they began going broke, and banks were going broke, and finance companies going broke, and they had to intervene. The state has to come up to rescue the banking system of Chile at the tune of, presently it would have been about $25 billion, more or less, money of dollars of today. That's why the Chileans, all of us taxpayers, bailed out the Chilean banking system, and Pinochet had to swallow his pride, kick out the Chicago boys, and devaluate, which was something that they wanted to avoid at all costs because it was part of the doctrine. Because the idea was there had to be an automatic adjustment by way of lowering wages and not by devaluating. So that this was absolute disaster. Why was this important? Because finally, those of us who thought, now we have an opportunity to maybe defeat Pinochet, we began mobilizing, and by that time, I had left all my idea of armed struggle in the past. In fact, when I was in Denver, I had been invited by a friend of mine from MIR, the more radical left, to keep my aim and to go target practice. We are going to target practice with a 45 caliber. And after that, after we had done that, it was sort of like out of body reality type situation, because I had done that, and then we're going to eat at Denny's, and then I'd gone to study for an exam. So I never touched another weapon since then. And I thought that the only chance to defeat Pinochet was through popular mobilization, peaceful popular mobilization, and the crumbling down of the model gave us a chance. So we began the protests, banging pots and pan at night, and this became a tremendous experience. And Pinochet was irate, and this was all of Chile, it seemed, protesting. Since the first protest, and then follow a second one, and a third. But he wouldn't go away, even though he was really irate, and he began shooting people that were protesting, and the situation became more and more serious. But nevertheless, we thought that we had to continue, and the clever person that he was, he named a Minister of the Interior to do a sort of a dialogue with the opposition that began to be finally recognized in practice, not legally though. But Pinochet was smarter than that, and he said that there was just leg work, as the boxers do, to fool around, to fool the opposition. He was just fooling the opposition by doing this dialogue, and nothing happened. So it came to a moment where we thought, what do we do to defeat this guy? Because at that moment he had already approved the constitution where he would do, as Steve said, a plebiscite in 1988, which for him was not a plebiscite. It was merely a hiatus in a 16-year period. He had calculated by that by 1996, because there was a 16-year period by when this was being discussed in 1980, he would be in his late 80s, and by that time he would be ready for retirement. So he had thought, you know, we will have this ratification referendum, he referred to it, in 1988. And the challenge that we had in the opposition was, what do we do about this? Do we participate in this? At first we asked for clean, competitive elections, and we created a movement for free elections. But soon enough we began thinking that he's not going to give us this, and we went out to decide, do we participate in the plebiscite or not? My feeling was that we had to play his game. And I remember that I went to Los Angeles, invited by a friend of mine to give a few lectures, and the Los Angeles Times asked me to write a piece where I advocated participating in the plebiscite. Then I gave a lecture at the University of California, San Diego, and there were these Chileans there who said to me publicly, by the way, in a meeting like this, that I was at best naive, at worst a traitor, because I advocated that. Well, I was pretty at ease with myself because I was going back to the front lines and they were staying in nice southern and sunny Southern California, so I had no problem with that. The point is, we had to begin seeing whether we would do it or not, and the opposition was divided, because at the moment we were thinking that maybe we should participate in the plebiscite, the Communist Party, the most rational party historically in Chile that had always opposed armed struggle, was now not only toying with the idea of armed struggle, but was creating a military wing. And the point is that Chile had taught different experiences to different world leaders. We followed Enrico Berlinguer, who has said about the Chilean experience that the Chilean experience, what it demonstrated was that the only way to advance towards socialism was through democracy within the rule of law, and that it needed a compromiso histórico, a historical compromise between the left and the Christian Democrats. He was thinking about Italy, but he was thinking about Chile. So we thought, yes, he's right. We need a compromiso histórico, historical compromise that is uniting all the Democrats, those that have been on opposite poles during the time of Allende, because the Christian Democrats have been against Allende and have fought against Allende, have done everything possible to remove him, and those of us who were with Allende. And that was a lesson, we thought. And that compromiso histórico was going to be needed if we were able to defeat Pinochet, to build democracy, and to build change. But on the other side, the communists had gotten another lesson. And on the 25th Party Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev gives a speech where all the Chilean leaders of the Communist Party are on the first row, and he says to them, a revolution must know how to defend itself. And basically says to the Chilean communists, you were either naive or cowards, because you did not use military means. And I am absolutely convinced that the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan was, as a very high member of the Politburo said at the time, guided by the fear of another Chile, this time a lot closer to the borders of the then Soviet Union.